I thought the worst thing about coming home for Christmas would be my mother's passive-aggressive comments about my weight. I never imagined I'd walk in on a stranger rifling through my childhood bedroom, or that this stranger would turn out to be someone my own family had hired to investigate me. The manila folder in his hands contained photographs of me leaving work, entering my apartment, even sitting alone in coffee shops. My hands trembled as I realized the extent of their betrayal. My name is Amelia Foster, and I am 32 years old. I work as a marketing director for a mid-sized firm called Meridian Communications in downtown Seattle. For the past 3 years, I've been trying to rebuild my life after a messy divorce that left me emotionally and financially drained. I thought I was doing well. I had a decent job, a small but comfortable apartment, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. What I didn't know was that my family had been watching my every move, documenting my failures, and building a case against me. The man in my room was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen too much of the world's ugliness. When he saw me in the doorway, he didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. He simply closed the folder and extended his hand as if we were meeting at a business lunch. "Miss Foster," he said in a gravelly voice, "I'm Detective Roy Brennan. Your family asked me to compile some information about your recent activities." I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "My family hired you to spy on me?" "Investigate," he corrected, as if the distinction mattered. "They were concerned about some of your recent decisions and wanted to ensure you were stable." The word hit me like a physical blow, stable, as if I were some kind of mental patient who couldn't be trusted to live her own life. I heard footsteps on the stairs and knew the rest of my family was coming to face the music. My mother appeared first, her perfectly styled blonde hair not a strand out of place despite the early hour. Behind her came my father, his face wearing the same stern expression he'd perfected during my teenage years. My older brother Marcus brought up the rear, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture. "Amelia," my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment I'd grown up with. "We can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice rising. "Can you explain why you hired a private detective to follow me around like I'm some kind of criminal?" My father cleared his throat, the sound he always made when he was about to deliver what he considered to be wisdom. "We were worried about you, sweetheart. After the divorce, you've been making some questionable choices. We just wanted to make sure you weren't getting into any trouble." "What questionable choices?" I demanded. "Going to work every day, paying my bills on time, living my life as a functioning adult?" Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with the righteousness that had always made him insufferable. "You've been secretive, Amelia. You barely call anymore. You canceled Thanksgiving at the last minute. Mom found out you've been seeing a therapist, which you never mentioned to any of us." "I'm seeing a therapist because I'm trying to work through some issues," I said, my voice tight with anger. "Issues that apparently include having a family who thinks it's acceptable to violate my privacy." "We found the medication," my mother said quietly, "in your purse when you visited last month. Antidepressants. Why didn't you tell us you were struggling?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The medication was none of their business, but I'd been careless during my last visit, leaving my purse open on the kitchen counter while I helped with dinner. "Because it's personal, Mom. Because I'm an adult who doesn't need to report every detail of my life to you." Detective Brennan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps I should give you all some privacy to discuss this." "No," I said sharply. "You stay right where you are. I want to know exactly what you found out about me and what you reported back to my family." He looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd discovered him. "Miss Foster, I don't think that's—" "I'm paying for this too, aren't I?" I interrupted. "If my family hired you to investigate me, then I have a right to know what you discovered." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Amelia, we just wanted to make sure you were okay." "Then you should have asked me directly instead of hiring a stranger to follow me around." I turned back to Detective Brennan. "What did you find out? What terrible secrets did you uncover?" He opened the folder reluctantly and pulled out several photographs. The first showed me leaving my apartment building in jeans and a t-shirt, my hair in a messy bun. The second captured me sitting alone in a coffee shop, staring out the window. The third showed me entering a small building downtown. "That's Dr. Martinez's office," I said, recognizing the building. "My therapist." "Your family was concerned about the frequency of your visits," Detective Brennan said. "You've been going twice a week for the past 6 months." "Because I'm working through some difficult emotions," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Because I'm trying to get better." The next photograph showed me at a grocery store, my cart filled with what looked like mostly frozen dinners and wine. "They were concerned about your diet and alcohol consumption," Detective Brennan continued. I laughed bitterly. "I work 60 hours a week and I'm exhausted. Sometimes I buy frozen dinners, sometimes I have a glass of wine with dinner. Since when is that a crime?" "It's not a crime," my mother said gently. "But it's not healthy either. You used to love cooking. You used to take such good care of yourself." "That was when I was married and had someone to cook for," I snapped. "Now I live alone and I eat what's convenient. I'm sorry if that disappoints you." Detective Brennan pulled out another photograph, this one showing me with a man I didn't recognize at first. We were sitting at a restaurant, and he was leaning across the table toward me. Then I remembered. It was David, a colleague from work who'd asked me out for coffee after a particularly stressful day. We'd grabbed dinner afterward, but it had been purely platonic. He was married with kids and was just being friendly. "They were concerned about your romantic relationships," Detective Brennan said. "This man is married." "David is a friend," I said, my voice rising again. "We were just having dinner. Nothing happened." "But you didn't mention him to us," Marcus said accusingly. "You never talk about anyone you're seeing or spending time with." "Because I'm not seeing anyone," I said, exasperated. "Because I'm still trying to figure out who I am outside of my marriage. Because I'm not ready to date anyone seriously and I don't want to deal with your questions and opinions about every person I meet." The next photograph was the one that broke my heart. It showed me sitting in my car in the parking lot of my old house, the one I'd shared with my ex-husband. I'd driven by one afternoon after a particularly difficult therapy session, not to cause trouble or to see him, but just to remember what it felt like to have a home. I'd sat there for maybe 10 minutes before driving away, but Detective Brennan had captured the moment perfectly. "This was taken last Tuesday," he said. "You sat outside your former residence for approximately 12 minutes. "I was just remembering," I said quietly. "I wasn't stalking him or trying to cause problems. I was just remembering what it felt like to belong somewhere." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the concern in my parents' eyes, the way they exchanged glances as if they were communicating telepathically. Marcus looked uncomfortable, as if he was finally beginning to understand that their investigation had crossed a line. "The final concern," Detective Brennan said hesitantly, "was your financial situation. You've been taking money out of your savings account regularly. Large amounts." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was the part I'd been dreading, the part I'd been trying to hide from everyone. "I've been paying for my therapy sessions, and I've been helping someone." "Helping who?" my mother asked. "My ex-husband," I said quietly. "He lost his job 3 months ago, and he's been struggling to make the mortgage payments. I've been helping him so he doesn't lose the house." The room erupted in protests. My father's face turned red with anger. Marcus started pacing, and my mother looked like she was about to cry. Detective Brennan stood quietly in the corner, probably wishing he'd never taken this case. "You've been giving money to the man who cheated on you?" my father demanded. "The man who destroyed your marriage?" "The man who's struggling and needed help," I corrected. "Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he hurt me. But he's not a monster. Dad, he's just a person who made some bad choices." "This is exactly what we were worried about," Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. "You're not thinking clearly. You're giving money to someone who betrayed you while you're living in a tiny apartment and eating frozen dinners." "I'm making my own choices," I said firmly. "Choices that you might not agree with." but choices that are mine to make. But they're not good choices, my mother said, tears starting to form in her eyes. Honey, we can see that you're struggling. We can see that you're not taking care of yourself properly. We were just trying to help. By spying on me? I asked incredulously. By violating my privacy and treating me like I'm incompetent? By gathering information so we could intervene if necessary? My father said. You've been pushing us away. Amelia, you won't talk to us about what's really going on in your life. What were we supposed to do? You were supposed to trust me, I said, my voice breaking. You were supposed to believe that I'm capable of handling my own life, even if I'm not handling it the way you would. Detective Brennan cleared his throat again. If I may, he said carefully, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of this investigation. We all turned to look at him. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of him. Your family didn't hire me to spy on you, he said. They hired me to conduct what we call a wellness check. They were concerned about your safety and well-being, not trying to catch you doing something wrong. What's the difference? I asked. The difference is in the intent, he said. They weren't looking for evidence of wrongdoing. They were looking for evidence that you were okay, or evidence that you might need help. And what did you conclude? I asked. He looked around the room at my family members, then back at me. I concluded that you're a woman who's been through a difficult divorce and is working hard to rebuild her life. You're seeing a therapist, which shows you're taking care of your mental health. You're maintaining employment and paying your bills. You're even helping your ex-husband, which shows compassion, even if it might not be the most financially sound decision. So I'm not crazy? I asked sarcastically. You're not crazy, he said seriously. You're grieving. You're healing. You're making some choices that others might question, but they're not dangerous or irrational choices. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. It was validating to hear an objective observer confirm what I'd been trying to tell myself for months. But, Detective Brennan continued, I also think your family has legitimate concerns. You have been isolating yourself from them. You have been secretive about your struggles. And while your choices aren't wrong, they might not be the healthiest ones for your long-term well-being. I looked around the room at my family. My mother was crying quietly. My father looked ashamed. And Marcus was staring at the floor. They'd violated my privacy and betrayed my trust. But they'd done it out of love and concern. That didn't make it okay, but it made it understandable. I need some air, I said finally. I need to think about all of this. I walked out of the room and down the stairs, through the kitchen and out the back door into the yard where I'd played as a child. The December air was crisp and clean, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. I sat down on the old wooden swing my father had built when I was 7 and tried to process everything that had just happened. I could hear voices from inside the house, my family and Detective Brennan discussing the situation. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone of regret and concern. They were probably trying to figure out how to fix this, how to make things right between us. The truth was, I had been struggling. I had been isolating myself, making questionable financial decisions, and probably not taking the best care of myself. But I'd also been working hard to heal from the trauma of my divorce, to rebuild my sense of self-worth, and to figure out who I was as an independent woman. That process was messy and imperfect, but it was mine. After about 20 minutes, my mother came outside and sat down on the swing beside me. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there in the cold air with me, the way she used to when I was a child and had scraped my knee or fought with friends at school. I'm sorry, she said finally. We handled this all wrong. Yes, you did, I said. But there was no anger in my voice anymore. I was too exhausted to be angry. We were scared, she continued. After the divorce, you changed. You became distant and secretive. We didn't know how to help you. You could have asked me directly, I said. You could have said, Amelia, we're worried about you. How can we help? We tried, she said. But every time we asked, you said you were fine. You said you didn't need help. You said you were handling everything on your own. I considered this. She was right. I had been saying those things, even when they weren't entirely true. I'd been so determined to prove that I could handle my life independently that I'd shut out the people who loved me most. I didn't want you to see me as weak, I admitted. I didn't want you to think I'd failed. Oh, honey, she said, reaching over to take my hand. You could never be a failure to us. You're our daughter. We love you no matter what. Even when I'm giving money to my cheating ex-husband and eating frozen dinners for breakfast, she laughed softly. Even then, though we might have some opinions about those choices. I know they're not perfect choices, I said, but they're the choices I need to make right now. I need to know that I'm capable of forgiveness, even if it costs me money. I need to know that I can take care of myself, even if it means eating convenience food sometimes. We understand that now, she said. We just wish you'd trusted us enough to tell us what you were going through. I squeezed her hand. I wish I had too. But I was afraid you'd try to fix everything for me, and I needed to learn how to fix things for myself. We probably would have, she admitted. Your father was already talking about offering to pay for your therapy sessions and bring you groceries every week. I know, I said, and I love that you want to help. But I need to do this on my own, at least for now. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the bare trees in the yard. Finally, my mother spoke again. Detective Brennan is leaving, she said. He said he'd send us a written report, but that he thought we should focus on talking to you directly instead of investigating you. Good advice, I said. Your father wants to pay for family counseling, she continued. All of us together. He thinks we need to learn how to communicate better. I considered this. The idea of sitting in a therapist's office with my entire family felt overwhelming, but it also felt like a step in the right direction. I think that's a good idea, I said, but I have some conditions. What kind of conditions? I want to pick the therapist, I said. I want someone who specializes in family dynamics and adult children, and I want everyone to commit to at least 6 sessions, even if it gets uncomfortable. Deal, she said without hesitation. And I want to keep seeing my individual therapist too. I continued. That's my space to work through my own issues, and I don't want anyone trying to interfere with that. Of course, she said. We never should have questioned that in the first place. We went back inside, where my father and Marcus were waiting in the living room. Detective Brennan had left, taking his folder of photographs with him. My father looked up when we entered, his eyes red-rimmed and apologetic. I'm sorry, sweetheart, he said, standing up to hug me. We violated your trust and your privacy. There's no excuse for that. I know you were trying to help, I said, accepting his hug. But you can't help me by spying on me. You can only help me by being honest with me and letting me be honest with you. We want to do better, Marcus said. All of us. We want to be the kind of family you feel comfortable talking to. That's going to take time, I said. And it's going to take effort from all of us. I need to be more open about what's going on in my life, even when it's messy or embarrassing. And you all need to trust that I'm capable of making my own decisions, even when they're not the decisions you would make. We can do that, my father said. We want to do that. Over the next few hours, we talked more than we had in years. I told them about my therapy sessions, about the work I was doing to understand my patterns in relationships, and my tendency to lose myself in other people's needs. I told them about my job, about the challenges I was facing and the successes I was proud of. I even told them about David, the married colleague, and how guilty I'd felt about enjoying his company even though nothing romantic had happened. They told me about their own struggles. My mother admitted that she'd been dealing with anxiety about my divorce and had been seeing her own therapist. My father talked about his fears that he'd failed as a parent, that he hadn't taught me how to recognize and avoid unhealthy relationships. Marcus confessed that he'd been jealous of the independence I'd shown after my divorce, that he sometimes felt trapped in his own marriage and wished he had the courage to make changes in his life. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments of tension and disagreement, but it was honest in a way our family conversations hadn't been in years. As the evening wore on, I found myself thinking about Detective Brennan's photographs. The images had been invasive and violating, but they'd also been accurate. I was a woman who sat alone in coffee shops, who drove by her old house when she was feeling nostalgic, who was navigating the complex emotions of helping someone who had hurt her. I was someone who was struggling, but also someone who was fighting to rebuild her life. The photographs had captured my loneliness, but they'd also captured my resilience. They'd shown my questionable choices, but they'd also shown my capacity for forgiveness and growth. They'd revealed my isolation, but they'd also revealed my determination to heal. "I want to see the written report," I said suddenly. My family looked at me in surprise. "Detective Brennan's report," I clarified. "When it comes, I want to read it." "Are you sure?" my mother asked. "It might be difficult to read." "I'm sure," I said. "I want to see how my life looks from the outside. I want to understand what you all were seeing that made you so worried." "You don't have to put yourself through that," Marcus said. "I know," I said. "But I want to. I think it might help me understand some things about myself." 2 weeks later, the report arrived. It was 5 pages long, written in Detective Brennan's careful professional language. He documented my daily routines, my social interactions, my financial transactions, and my emotional state as observed from the outside. It was strange and unsettling to read about myself as if I were a stranger. But it was also enlightening. The report painted a picture of a woman who was indeed struggling with depression and isolation, but who was also actively working to address those issues. It noted my consistent attendance at therapy sessions, my reliable work performance, and my efforts to maintain friendships despite my tendency to withdraw. The report also noted something I hadn't expected: signs of growth and healing. Detective Brennan had observed that my posture had improved over the course of his investigation, that I'd started wearing brighter colors, that I'd begun to smile more frequently. He'd documented a lunch I'd had with a female colleague, a conversation I'd had with my neighbor, a moment when I'd stopped to pet a dog on the street. "Subject appears to be in a transitional period," he'd written. "While she is clearly dealing with significant emotional challenges, she is also demonstrating resilience and a commitment to personal growth. Her choices, while sometimes questionable from an outside perspective, appear to be part of a deliberate process of self-discovery and healing." Reading the report was both humbling and validating. It confirmed that I was struggling, but it also confirmed that I was working to get better. It showed that my family's concerns were legitimate, but it also showed that their fears were perhaps greater than the reality of my situation. I shared the report with my individual therapist, Dr. Martinez, during our next session. She read it carefully and then looked at me with a slight smile. "How do you feel about seeing yourself described this way?" she asked. "Vulnerable," I said, "but also proud." I didn't realize how much progress I'd made until I saw it documented like this. "The report notes that you've been helping your ex-husband financially," she said. "How do you feel about that being characterized as a questionable choice?" I considered this. "I think it probably is questionable from a financial standpoint," I said. "But I also think it's something I needed to do for my own healing. I needed to know that I could forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine." "One sees? And how do you feel about that forgiveness now?" "Complicated," I admitted. "I'm glad I was able to do it, but I also think I'm ready to stop. I've proven to myself that I can be generous and forgiving. Now I need to prove to myself that I can set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "That sounds like growth to me." The family counseling sessions began a month later. They were difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, but they were also productive. We worked on communication skills, on setting healthy boundaries, and on rebuilding trust. My family learned to ask direct questions instead of making assumptions, and I learned to share my struggles without feeling like I was admitting defeat. It wasn't a quick or easy process. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when I wondered if we'd ever be able to repair the damage that had been done. But slowly, gradually, we began to find our way back to each other. 6 months later, I was in a very different place. I was still seeing Dr. Martinez, but only once a week instead of twice. I'd stopped giving money to my ex-husband and had started putting that money toward a down payment on a small house. I'd started dating again, cautiously but with genuine interest in finding a healthy relationship. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my family again, and they'd learned to trust me. We talked regularly, honestly, about the challenges we were facing and the support we needed from each other. When I had a difficult day, I called them instead of withdrawing. When they had concerns about my choices, they asked me directly instead of investigating behind my back. The experience of being investigated by my own family had been one of the most painful things I'd ever gone through. But it had also been a catalyst for growth and healing that I might not have achieved otherwise. It had forced all of us to confront our fears and assumptions, to examine our patterns of communication, and to work toward building healthier relationships. I kept Detective Brennan's report in a folder in my desk drawer, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of resilience. It was evidence that even in my darkest moments, I was still fighting to build a better life. It was proof that healing is possible, even when it's messy and imperfect and observed by strangers with cameras. And it was a reminder that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who see our struggles most clearly, even when they don't always respond to those struggles in the most helpful ways. My family had violated my privacy and broken my trust. But they'd done it because they loved me and were afraid of losing me. That didn't make their actions right, but it made them human. In the end, the investigation had revealed exactly what Detective Brennan had concluded. I was a woman who had been through a difficult divorce and was working hard to rebuild her life. I was making some questionable choices, but they were my choices to make. I was struggling, but I was also healing. I was isolated, but I was also learning to reach out. And most importantly, I was not alone. Even when I felt most disconnected from my family, even when they were watching me from a distance through the lens of a stranger's camera, I was not alone. They were there, worried and flawed and imperfect, but there nonetheless. The manila folder that had once contained evidence of my private struggles now contained something else. Proof that love, even when it's expressed imperfectly, has the power to heal and transform. It had taken a private detective to help us see that truth, but once we saw it, we were able to build something better from the wreckage of our broken trust. I was still Amelia Foster, still a woman rebuilding her life after divorce, still someone who sometimes ate frozen dinners and sat alone in coffee shops. But I was also someone who had learned to forgive, to trust, and to let herself be loved despite her imperfections. And that, I thought, was worth investigating.